Pirates stockpiled foods that never expired. That's the promise, right? Supplies so well preserved they'd outlast the voyage no matter how long. And it's true. Hardtack biscuits from the 1850s still exist in museums today, technically edible. Salt pork could sit in barrels for years without rotting. Dried peas lasted indefinitely. But here's what that actually meant. Rock-hard biscuits crawling with weevil larvae. Meat so tough, sailors carved it into buttons. Cheese infested with maggots. Water so foul you had to mix it with rum just to choke it down. These foods didn't expire because they'd been processed into something barely recognizable as food, baked until stone hard, salted until toxic, dried until dead. The pirates who ate this stuff weren't enjoying some clever survival hack. They were suffering through 20 different varieties of preserved misery, each one designed to keep them alive just long enough to wish they weren't. This is how they actually ate, and why never expired was just another way of saying slowly kills you. Food preservation in the 1700s came down to one brutal fact. Bacteria need water to grow. Remove the moisture, stop the rot. Simple physics. Pirates didn't understand the microbiology. They wouldn't for another century. But they understood the outcome. Anything wet went bad within days. Anything dry could last months, maybe years. Salt pulled water out of meat through osmosis. Baking drove water out of flour through heat. Barrels kept water out of dry goods through sealing. Every food pirates carried represented a different strategy in the same war, moisture versus preservation. And moisture always won eventually. The problem was that removing water made food borderline inedible. Salt beef became so tough you could carve buttons from it. Hardtack biscuits turned dense enough to break teeth. Cheese dried into blocks that required soaking before you could bite through them. The choice was never between fresh and preserved. You picked between edible and surviving another week. 3 foods genuinely never expired, and all 3 were miserable to consume. Hardtack came first. Take flour and water, add a pinch of salt if you're feeling generous, then bake it twice, sometimes 4 times. The result was a cracker, roughly the size of your fist, and about as edible as concrete. Bakers prepared hardtack 6 months before a ship even left port, letting it cure into maximum hardness. Properly stored, kept bone dry in sealed bags, it could last years. Museums today still have specimens from the 1850s. The nicknames tell you everything. Molar breakers, sheet iron, tooth dullers. Sailors couldn't bite into hardtack without risking their teeth, so they developed workarounds. Wrap it in cloth and smash it with a knife handle. Suck on pieces until saliva broke them down. Soak them in coffee, rum, broth, whatever liquid you had. Some crews made Scotch coffee, burnt hardtack, boiled with water and sweetened with molasses, which tasted exactly as bad as it sounds. Then the weevils showed up. The eggs were baked into the flour from the start, but they took weeks to hatch. By the time you were a month into a voyage, the hardtack was crawling. Tiny white larvae with black heads, called bargemen by sailors because they looked like miniature oarsmen swarming a boat. They'd wiggle out of holes in the biscuit when you tapped it against the table. Most sailors just ate them. The larvae didn't taste like much, certainly better than the bitter flavour of adult weevils, which had to be picked out. Some crews ate in darkness to avoid seeing the infestation. Others accepted it as bonus protein. The real problem was hardtack with no weevils. If the biscuits were too hard and too dry for even bugs to survive, you were in trouble. Salt was the second immortal. The preservative itself, eternal as long as you kept it dry. Without salt, none of the other preservation methods worked. It drew water out of everything it touched: meat, fish, vegetables, even butter. Concentrations had to hit 20% before most bacteria died, which meant the food ended up spectacularly salty. Sailors in the Royal Navy consumed salt at 42 times modern recommended limits. Their kidneys paid for it. The third immortal, dried spices. Pepper, mustard seeds, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, garlic, allspice. These lasted indefinitely and were so valuable that pirates specifically targeted spice cargoes. Preservation wasn't the reason, flavor was. By month 3 of a voyage, everything tasted rancid despite the salt and drying. Heavy seasoning was the only thing that made rotten food palatable. Salted meat was the foundation of every long voyage, and it was absolutely vile. The preservation process started on land, months before the ship sailed. Butchers slaughtered cattle and pigs in fall and winter, then spent weeks processing the meat. First, dry rub it with white salt to start drawing moisture out. Next, soak it in brine for 5 days to remove the blood. Blood made meat spoil faster. Then pack it into wooden barrels with layers of bay salt between each piece of meat. Final step, pour in fresh brine, mixed strong enough that an egg would float in it. The result resembled black oak more than food. Samuel Pepys, the naval administrator, recorded sailors carving salted beef into buttons and belt buckles because it was genuinely that hard. You couldn't eat it without preparation. Had to soak it overnight, sometimes longer, just to soften it enough to chew. Even then, it tasted like salted leather. Salted cod came in barrels too, heavily salted and often dried until it was stiff as a board. The problem with fish was that it spoiled more easily than meat, even with salt. Dampness in the ship's hold could ruin an entire barrel of cod within weeks. By 1731, the Royal Navy officially stopped issuing fish rations, replacing them with oatmeal. The cost of all this salt was physiological. 42 times modern recommended limits. Every day. Your kidneys filtered salt constantly, your body screamed for fresh water to dilute it, and fresh water was the one thing you didn't have. The salt created a desperate, unquenchable thirst that lasted for months. And when the salted meat finally went rancid, truly rotten despite the preservation, you ate it anyway. Cooks masked the taste with every spice they had. Dried peas and beans lasted indefinitely and saved more lives than anyone counted. Simple, cheap, easy to store. You threw them in a barrel, kept them dry, and reconstituted them months later into thick soup. Split pea soup was standard. Boil the peas until they broke down into mush. Add some salted pork if you had it. Season heavily. The peas provided protein, fibre, and a bit of vitamin C, which helped delay scurvy. Oatmeal replaced fish in the Royal Navy rations after 1731, because medical professionals noticed that heavy salt intake was making sailors sick. 3 pints of oatmeal per week, per man. You could make it into loblolly or burgoo. Thick oatmeal stew that was either sweet with butter and sugar or savoury with meat. It filled your stomach and gave you energy for the brutal physical labour of working a ship. Flour got stored in barrels in the lower hold, which meant the rats fed on it constantly. You'd open a flour barrel weeks into a voyage and find it half-eaten, mixed with rat droppings, sometimes with live rats still inside. You sifted out what you could and used the rest anyway. Flour made doughboys, dumplings of flour and suet, boiled or fried in lard. Crews preferred them to hardtack by a wide margin, but doughboys required effort to make. Flour also made puddings. Mix it with suet or raisins, wrap it in a cloth bag, boil it for hours. The Royal Navy made this official policy in 1731. Issue pudding instead of beef 1 day per week. And through all of this, the weevils came back. Peas, oatmeal, flour, rice. Weevil eggs survived most storage methods, hatching after weeks of warmth and darkness. By month 2, you were picking larvae out of your soup. By month 3, you'd stopped picking them out. Extra protein, Butter came in barrels, sometimes preserved in salt, and it went rancid fast. Dairy cows produced most of their milk in spring and summer when they were feeding calves. Butter got churned, packed into casks, and sold to ships months later. By the time you opened it at sea, especially in tropical heat, it had often turned to what sailors called rancid slime. Yellow, reeking, separated into foul-smelling fat and liquid. You ate it anyway. Cheese lasted longer, but only if you bought the right kind. Cheshire cheese, made with full-fat milk, was popular but didn't keep as well. Suffolk cheese, made with skimmed milk, was harder and drier, which gave it a longer shelf life. Ships carried blocks of aged cheese that you needed to soak in liquid before you could bite through them. By month 3, even the hard cheese started developing mold. You scraped it off and ate what was underneath. Olive oil replaced butter on ships sailing the Mediterranean, more stable in heat than dairy fat. But more stable was relative. Olive oil had maybe 4 months of good storage at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat and light oxidized it quickly, turning it bitter and rancid. Suet and lard, animal fats from around the kidneys or rendered from pigs, lasted years if you could vacuum seal them. Most pirate ships couldn't, so they got a few months at best. Both added desperately needed calories to a diet that was otherwise protein and starch. And when the fats finally went rancid, you used them anyway because throwing away calories meant starving faster. Fresh water failed first. Always. Stored in wooden barrels, water started turning stagnant and slimy within weeks. Something would grow in it, algae, bacteria, something that made it taste foul and gave you cramps if you drank too much. Sailors described it as slimy and stinking, which undersold how bad it actually was, so everyone drank alcohol instead. Beer and ale lasted longer than water. The alcohol content and the brewing process killed most of the dangerous microbes. The Royal Navy issued a gallon of beer per day to each sailor in northern waters. A gallon, every day. Rum was better. Distilled from molasses in the Caribbean, it was nearly imperishable. High alcohol content meant nothing could grow in it, and it didn't take up much space. Half a pint per day for sailors in tropical waters, mixed with water to create grog. The rum masked the foul taste of the stagnant water, and the alcohol made the water safer to drink. Wine worked too. Mixed 2 parts wine to 6 parts water to preserve the water from stinking, as the official regulations put it. Vinegar served double duty, preservative and drink additive. You could pickle vegetables and meat in vinegar, extending their life by weeks. Some crews added vinegar to their water rations to improve the taste and safety. Sugar came in solid loaves, blocks of crystallized sugar that you scraped with a knife when you needed some. It lasted indefinitely if kept dry, and it was cheap in the Caribbean, sweetened the coffee, the rum, the horrific stews you made from spoiled meat. Molasses was what was left after sugar crystallization, thick, dark syrup that could be spread on hardtack or used to make rum. The foods that never expired weren't preserved at all. They were kept alive. Chickens in wooden pens on the main deck, clucking and laying eggs until you needed meat. Goats providing milk each morning. Pigs eating table scraps and ship's refuse, growing fat enough to slaughter. These animals didn't need fancy preservation. They preserved themselves by staying alive. But the real innovation was sea turtles. Caribbean waters teemed with them, massive creatures weighing 300 to 400 pounds, swimming slowly near the surface. Buccaneers and pirates hunted them obsessively, and for good reason. One turtle could feed dozens of men with fresh meat that tasted like chicken. Better yet, turtles could survive for months in the ship's hold without food or water. Their metabolism was so slow, they just didn't die. The method was brutal and effective. Catch the turtle, either by harpooning them at sea or hunting them on beaches during nesting season. Flip them on their backs to immobilize them. Stack them in the hold, sometimes dozens at a time, and leave them there. They'd stay alive for months in the dark, unable to move, unable to feed. When you needed fresh meat, you'd carry one up to the deck, slaughter it, and butcher it. Fresh meat prevented scurvy. The vitamin C in turtle meat, along with other nutrients missing from hardtack and salt pork, kept your gums from rotting and your muscles from deteriorating. This wasn't understood at the time. Sailors just knew that crews who ate fresh meat stayed healthier than crews who didn't. So turtle hunting became standard practice for pirates and privateers operating in the Caribbean. The cruelty didn't bother anyone. Keeping a 400-pound animal alive in the dark for months without food, unable to move so you could eat it fresh later, this was considered clever problem solving. It worked. The turtles kept crews alive through voyages that would otherwise have killed them. Scurvy killed an estimated 2 million sailors between 1500 and 1800. 2 million. That's sailors dying from vitamin C deficiency because their food couldn't keep them healthy. The expected casualty rate on long voyages was 50%. Half the crew dead from the diet alone. The symptoms were nightmare fuel. Your gums started rotting first, soft, bleeding, receding until your teeth fell out. Then your muscles began deteriorating. Old wounds reopened. Your joints swelled with fluid. You became too weak to work, then too weak to stand, then you died. The whole process took months. Pirates had some advantages here. Shorter voyages meant less time between fresh food. Turtle hunting provided vitamin C that Navy crews couldn't access. But advantages weren't guarantees. Once you ran out of fresh supplies, you were dying at the same rate as everyone else. The salt intake was killing people too, just slower. 42 times modern recommended limits, every single day. Your kidneys worked overtime, filtering the sodium, your blood pressure climbed, your body struggled to maintain proper fluid balance. The salt kept them alive by preserving their food. It also destroyed their bodies. And when even the preserved food went bad, truly completely spoiled, you ate it anyway, or you starved. Hardtack so moldy it was green. Salt beef that had turned rancid despite the salt. Butter that smelled like death. At that point you had two choices. Eat it and risk sickness, or throw it away and start starving. Historical accounts from ships that ran out of food are worse than any horror story. Crews ate rats, hunted them in the hold, roasted them, picked the bones clean, boiled strips of leather from the rigging because it had some fat content from the tanning process, chewed on their shoes, mixed sawdust with animal fat and ate that. The 20 foods that never expired were all that stood between normal misery and that particular horror. Hardtack kept you from eating rats. Salt pork kept you from boiling your shoes. The weevil-infested biscuits, the rancid butter, the cheese with maggots, these were preservation working as intended. There's a museum in Denmark that keeps a piece of hardtack from 1851, nearly 200 years old. You could probably still eat it, technically. Soak it long enough, break it down, force it past your teeth. That's the promise these foods made: permanence, reliability, survival. But preservation was never about comfort. It was about making a choice. Die now from hunger, or die slowly from everything the food does to your body. The weevils, the salt poisoning, the scurvy, the rancid fats, these were the system working exactly as designed. Every bite was a trade. More time alive, less quality in that life. The pirates who sailed the Caribbean, raiding merchant ships and hunting turtles, eating hardtack in the dark so they couldn't see the bugs, they understood this better than anyone. The ocean was endless, The voyage was uncertain, the food was miserable, and you ate it anyway, because the alternative was sinking to the bottom with an empty stomach. Never expired sounds like victory. Like human ingenuity conquering nature, preserving abundance, defeating time itself. But those foods didn't defeat anything. They just postponed the reckoning. Every barrel of salt pork, every bag of hardtack, every turtle stacked in the hold. They bought you days, maybe weeks. And in exchange, you gave up any illusion that life at sea was anything other than controlled starvation. The food kept them alive. That was all it ever promised to do.